Corel Painter's thick paint is as close as you can get to feeling like you're pushing around real paint. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to enhance that realism a step further by making the paint interact with the canvas just like it would in real life. We'll have thinner paint that goes into the grain of the canvas, and we'll have thicker paint that completely covers the canvas grain. That's coming up next. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Corel Painter Master Aaron Rutten, and it is my mission to help artists like you enjoy Corel Painter and learn some new skills along the way. Today we're going to be looking at how to make thick paint interact with the canvas in a realistic way. So here in the layers palette, I have a thick paint layer, and of course I can paint on that layer, but you may notice that it looks a little bit unnatural because the background is just a solid white. It doesn't have any texture, and it doesn't feel like a canvas or a piece of paper or anything physical. So we have this nice physical looking media floating on top of a very unnatural background. So let's go ahead and start fresh here. I'm going to start with this blank canvas, and let's actually add some canvas texture to it. Let's go to basic paper, and then we'll choose fine dots. And the settings I'm going to choose are 96 for the paper scale, 100% for the contrast, and then leave it at its default of 50% for the brightness, and 0% for the paper rotation. The brush that I'm using here is a custom brush called Broken Paint. And this particular brush can use the paper grain. If we look under grain, it's using random grain rotation and random grain position. And grain is set to 100%. If we look in the media panel, these are the settings I have here for the media and for the thick paint brush. So now when I paint a stroke, I'm getting something that looks kind of like this. Now if I use very, very light pressure, then you'll notice that you're just getting that canvas grain. So it's like your paintbrush is barely hovering above the surface and it's just catching the grain from that paper. If you press down harder, you'll start to notice that it starts to cover that grain and you can kind of get a nice blend. In fact, you can kind of almost smudge it out like this. So now it's starting to feel like there's some canvas texture, but we still don't see it on the paper. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to create a new layer above the canvas, and we'll call this canvas texture. We'll select a neutral gray, which is 128 for the value, 0 for saturation, 0 for hue. And then we'll go ahead and go to Edit Fill, and we'll fill that layer with current color. Now this gray is a magic color, meaning that if we change the composite method to overlay, then it disappears. However, if we were to add lighter or darker colors, those would show up. So what we can do is with the same grain selected that we're using for our brush, we're going to go to Effects, Surface Control, Apply Surface Texture. Now we can go ahead and click on OK, and it's still not going to look like anything happened, and that's because we need to go down to the canvas layer now, and we need to tone that. So we can select an almost white gray color, and then we'll simply go to Edit, Fill, and now all of a sudden we can see that canvas texture. And it's up to you if you want to play around with the color. You could actually just choose a different color. You want it to be a lighter canvas with less grain, or a darker canvas with heavier grain. If you wanted to start with a colored canvas, you could of course do that as well. But I'm just going to go ahead and try to simulate a white canvas. So something like that will work. I'll click on OK. And now we have our nice canvas that's toned and our canvas texture. So you could think of the canvas layer as the paper color, and then the canvas texture is of course the texture. So now let's go ahead and click on canvas texture, and let's go ahead and lock that with the lock icon so that we don't accidentally paint on that. Let's create a new thick paint layer, and we'll keep this layer beneath the canvas texture. So I'm just going to name this layer Under, that way we know what it is. I'm going to select a paint color here that we can see, and then we'll do a test stroke and see what we get. As long as I'm using the same grain from my brush and the same grain that I've applied to my canvas texture, then I'm going to get that effect of this paint interacting with this canvas in a natural way. So if we zoom into this now, you can see, if you look really closely at the canvas texture, that the paint is going into each of those little bumps. Now if I want the paint to go on top of those bumps and be thicker, then what I'll do is I'll create a new thick paint layer on top of the canvas texture. I'll just name this layer Above, and let's select a different color here. Let's select this blue color, and now we can see that we'll still get that canvas grain, but when we build it up nice and thick, it appears to cover that grain. Do another stroke here, and you can see it's covering it rather than going down into that texture. And then of course, if I use very light pressure, I could kind of scrape it off like this. If I wanted to, I could double click next to the layer here, and I could reduce the amount. I could flatten the paint out more so it's not so thick. Or if I wanted it to be thicker, I could double click again and I could just make it thicker. It gives you a lot of control over the different effects that you get with your paint, and it starts to add another element of realism to the paint. Now, what I recommend is once you get this set up, you go ahead and save your canvas with the texture as a template. So you could just simply delete all of the paint off of these layers. You could keep your above and your under layer and your canvas texture and your toned canvas, and then just simply save this by going to Save As. We could save it as a template RIF file, make sure it's a RIF file, and then at any time you can open this canvas and you can start painting on it. You can select your above layer, and you can start painting above with your thick paint. You can select your under layer and your other color, and you can start painting beneath the grain. In addition to saving your canvas as a template, you'll also want to save your brush look. So here in the look libraries, which can be found under Window, Media Library Panels, and then Looks, if we click on the top right subdialog here, we can choose Save Look, give our look a name, and once we save it, it'll show up in the Looks library here. Now I've gone ahead and drawn my own custom icons here. You can right click on the icon and you can choose a custom icon if you want to draw your own. But what this is going to do is when I click on the look now to select the brush, it's going to automatically select this specific paper grain with these specific settings so that it will identically match the paper in the background. And then of course I can add other types of looks here. I could paint on that under layer if I want kind of a more broken paint that's thinner and still has some of that canvas texture. Or I can go on the above layer, select a different color here, and then I can put down this thick paint that goes on top of the canvas texture and looks very thick. So there you go. Those are some tips that'll add life to your Corel Painter thick paint paintings. If you want to learn more about how to create paintings with Corel Painter, check out some of my downloadable video courses available at aaronrutten.com. I'll put a link down in the video description. Thanks for watching and be excellent to each other.